Hi there, I'm Ant Newman, I'm Director of Content here at Spectro Cloud, and I'm here to talk to you about our 2024 State of Production Kubernetes research. This is a big year for Kubernetes. It's 10 years old, and when you get to a milestone like that, you naturally look back, you look forward, and you see how far you've come and where you're going next. And that's exactly what we set out to cover in this year's research. This is the fourth year that we've conducted the State of Production Kubernetes, and as always, we only surveyed those who have not only adopted Kubernetes, but are using it in production. We surveyed all kinds of roles, DevOps, CTOs, platform engineers, all of whom are deeply involved in the use of Kubernetes in their business. We did a quantitative survey, and we did some deep dive telephone interviews, all of which were conducted by an independent research firm, so you know the data is reliable and robust. Today, I'm going to talk you through 5 key findings from the report. The first is that organizations are all in on Kubernetes. We've asked a couple of times over the years to what extent organizations feel like they are committed strategically to Kubernetes. The result is very clear. They are. In fact, 73% believe that Kubernetes will still be an important part of the enterprise tech stack in 10 years. 78% believe that it's a mature, production-ready enterprise technology, which is a huge leap forward for an open source project that started so relatively recently. Furthermore, 70% say that they themselves are highly mature in their use of Kubernetes. Now, we'll come back to this one a little bit later. As you'd expect from organizations that are highly committed to a technology, we're seeing greater levels of adoption this year. This is where our trending data really comes in. You see the red line shows that back in 2022, the typical number of clusters for an organization was around 2 to 5. In 2023, that had grown anywhere up to 11 to 20 clusters. This year, we're seeing that the majority of organizations are in this 21 to 50 cluster or above segment. So a real growth in just the last couple of years. If you cut this by size of business, large enterprises, many of them are in the more than 100 category. So we're really seeing a growth of adoption. Come back to some of the reasons why that might be a little later on. Those clusters are in more places. This is a bit of a complicated layered chart, but the key takeaway is here on the left. Nearly half of organizations say they have clusters in 4 or more environments. On-prem, edge, bare metal, multiple clouds. Kubernetes is kind of turning into the orchestration engine for any environment. It's the de facto translation layer. And we've really got this coming through in this first quote from a respondent here. Kubernetes is agnostic, at least from a cloud platform perspective. The second key takeaway I want to share with you is that despite this increasing adoption and all of that confidence in the maturity of Kubernetes, the same challenges are here. Again, bit of a complicated chart this, but what you see is we've asked organizations to choose which challenges they face when they're running Kubernetes in production. And you can see 2022, 2023, 2024. So to help you interpret this, the number of challenges chosen by organizations is increasing. And we're seeing some reordering. So you see here on the right, the number one challenge today is difficult to choose and validate the right stack components from the broad cloud-native ecosystem. We'll come back to that a little bit later on because we think that that's suggesting some future changes to the ecosystem. Second is configuration drift. This is an age-old problem, but as you get more clusters with more software elements in them, in more places, trying to keep control of that drift becomes harder and harder. Security breaches, we called that out as a separate one this year for the first time. Before that, it was here in this enterprise guardrails question. And so you can see security has come in at number 3, enterprise guardrails has naturally dropped. And the fourth one here, we struggle with the cost of Kubernetes environments. That was the least popular challenge last year, or the least picked challenge last year, and now it's shot up to number 4. So we'll explain a little bit about what that means later on. But you'd expect after 2 years of growth and maturity that these challenges will be dropping. They're not, they're going up. That in itself is an important takeaway. And it's not just that organizations are feeling these challenges and fixing them, they're actually suffering problems. The question that this data supports is to what extent do you suffer issues related to the running of your cluster based on the interoperability of the elements within your stack. And in previous years, you can see about 3/4 of organizations suffer some issues, but the amount suffering regular issues was down at the 10-11% mark. This year, that's more than doubled to 27%. Now, when you're suffering challenges and they are actually getting through into real issues that affect the running of your clusters, you know you've got a problem when you're running in production. You don't want 27% of the users to be regularly having availability or performance issues with their applications. Yeah, that's exactly what we've got today. We also asked this year for the first time a question about behavior related to all of those kinds of challenges. And the reason we asked this question was, if you follow social media, you'll have seen memes about laughing about how complex Kubernetes is, and how you can read articles about how difficult it is to find the right skills. But is that something that's actually really affecting how enterprises are adopting Kubernetes today, or is it something we all just laugh about? And the scary result is actually it is inhibiting the adoption of Kubernetes significantly. 38% of our audience said that the complexity of managing Kubernetes clusters has inhibited their adoption of Kubernetes a lot. 36% said the same about security, 35% about talent. Now, this is, if we're in the community trying to advocate for the adoption of Kubernetes, this is a significant problem that we need to address. We have a quote here from a manufacturer, from a DevOps engineer, who really brings this to light. The biggest issue is how complex it is to the layperson. We could have been at least twice as far as we are now. And that is a problem, and especially when you think about the fact that we are only in this survey talking to people that have successfully adopted Kubernetes in production. What about all of those that saw all these challenges and then went away and used serverless or stuck with virtual machines instead? So, the third key takeaway is that we need to brace for stormy seas ahead. We've seen all those challenges that organizations are facing today. Well, there's a chance that things might get worse. We asked some questions about the state of the cloud-native ecosystem and the open source projects and the commercial vendors that organizations use today. Again, if you've looked at social media and seen all the memes, it's a very common practice to start a presentation by saying, look at all these thousands of logos on the CNCF landscape. And part of us wants to say that that's a really good thing because there's so much choice, but part of us also feels daunted by it. So we asked organizations whether this actually is affecting them, and we asked a number of different parts of that question. So, number one, are you concerned that projects and vendors that you use are shutting down? More than half of organizations agreed. 22% of them strongly. So that's a very significant mark. It's not just some vendors out there in the landscape that may be shutting down, ones that you use today. Similarly, what about the open source projects you use? You've seen HashiCorp and Redis and others switch licenses and take some open source features back behind a paywall. Well, more than half of organizations say that open source projects they depend on are switching to restrictive licenses. And what about the sort of more proprietary vendor side? Well, 55% of organizations say they feel locked into proprietary platforms and they have their choice of technologies in that broad ecosystem restricted by the products they use today. And then the real headline here, do you think the cloud-native ecosystem is poised for market consolidation? 70% said yes. If we looked at our senior decision makers, the senior leaders, it's 82%. And in response to this, well, 58% of organizations already say they prefer to stick to tried and tested technologies, which kind of obviates the value of that whole cloud-native ecosystem anyway. We've got some great juicy quotes here to back this up. I'm losing sleep over VMware and some of these other vendors out there. Strong-arm tactics to increase their revenue. This one here, the biggest risk I see is making sure you pick a vendor that you trust to survive more than a year or two. You have to do extra in your vetting of products. For an enterprise technology customer to be this concerned about vendor risk and the behavior of vendors, it's a serious worry for us as a community and an industry. A second headwind that we wanted to dig into this year is cost. We've seen at the last few KubeCons a big increase in the number of presentations and vendors talking about FinOps and cloud cost optimization. And we wanted to see whether that's actually affecting things. So first, looking back, has your Kubernetes TCO increased over the past 12 months? About 2/3 of people said yes. Do you have good or accurate visibility of your future TCO? About 2/3 of people said no, a bit less than 2/3. And are you facing more pressure to reduce costs than a year ago from inside the business or from investors, for example? Again, 6 in 10 saying yes. These costs come from all kinds of places. People, software licenses, hardware. A big one is cost. And we saw right back at the beginning that about 94% of organizations, 99% say they use Kubernetes in the cloud. We've seen each of the hyperscalers report double-digit revenue growth this year, which doesn't just come from Kubernetes, but the cloud providers are ratcheting up. And this puts organizations in a tough position when they need to continue growth. We'll come on to some of the cost strategies later on. But what does all this mean? We've seen fears, we've seen challenges, we've seen fears about ecosystem turmoil, we've seen increasing costs. And this graph is the result. Now at the top here, you see the percentage of organizations who say they're going to be increasing their applications and the size of their or number of clusters. In previous years, it's about 80% said that they were going to grow those things. This year, it's only about 50% say they're going to continue growing. This line at the bottom says, do you plan to actually decline the number or size of clusters, the number of applications? In previous years, hardly anybody picked this option. They either picked growth or they picked stay the same size. And this year, for the first time, about a quarter of our respondents said they actually planned to shrink their Kubernetes estates. Now, this is I think, a real reflection of what we just saw. This is not about saying I'm abandoning Kubernetes. We already saw that everybody's committed to it. This is about saying, wow, our costs are growing. We've been growing rapidly for the last couple of years. We fired up new clusters. We've experimented with new projects. Now is the time to get on top of those things and cut the dead wood, consolidate clusters, spin things down that aren't being widely used. All the cost management research says that there is a significant underutilization in Kubernetes wherever it may be. And so I think this is really coming out this year. So the fourth of our key findings is around what organizations are doing in response to these challenges and some of the emerging strategies for success, the best practices, if you will. We, of course, had to ask about platform engineering this year. It's been such a buzz for the last couple of years. So far, the signs are mixed. About just under 1 in 3 organizations say that they have fully adopted platform engineering today, with another 40% somewhat there. In the interviews that we conducted, there was some skepticism. Lots of people saying, oh, it's just another buzzword. It's the same thing as DevOps. We're exploring it. We're starting to open up some roles maybe. But very few of our organizations said they were all in on platform engineering. And in fact, only 10% of our respondents call themselves platform engineers. They were vastly outnumbered by DevOps and SRE roles together. But there is some ray of sunshine here for those that are adopting platform engineering. This is that question about issues that we talked about earlier. Those that are fully adopted platform engineering, that they were much less likely to regularly suffer issues, much more likely to suffer hardly any issues at all. So this is a big growth area compared to those that have not adopted platform engineering, 40% of whom regularly suffer issues. So you can see that those that, this may be a cause or effect, those that have adopted platform engineering tend to see better infrastructure outcomes. That's powerful. As you move into a more mature market, more mature technology landscape, people tend to do less DIY. How many people roll their own email servers nowadays, or Active Directory? And we're seeing that roll through in the answer to this question, which is how do you manage your Kubernetes estate today? So you can see a drop significant drop in the number using cloud-specific dashboards. This may be because they realise that they don't get enough functionality out of that, or returning to where we started, organizations don't just put their Kubernetes Kubernetes clusters in one environment. You need a tool that covers everywhere that you run your Kubernetes estate. We're seeing a drop also in DIY. This is a build versus buy discussion, but we're seeing a big growth, steady growth, in use of commercial management tools and outsourcing and managed services. So these are the kinds of things you would do when you are using a more mature technology. And we found actually in our interviews quite a few of these kinds of comments at the top where people were saying the tools have got a lot better in the last couple of years. And that's a really good sign. We also asked about AI, and I'll come on more about AI a bit later on. But lots of skepticism about AI ops in the interviews. We've seen chatbots, but nothing that can help us as far as actually orchestrating and managing clusters, says this Director of Cloud and Application Security. In the past, we've speculated internally at Spectro Cloud about different strategies for running clusters. Do you have a few big clusters and rely on namespaces? Do you run lots of little clusters, which gives you some overhead? How do you balance sort of utilization versus isolation? So this year we asked about multi-tenancy strategies, and this was one of my favourite results in the survey. We found a bias towards running fully separate clusters for every team workload and activity, particularly in larger organisations, with only the smaller organisations saying they run as few clusters as possible. But you can see here that those that are running fewer clusters also use technologies like vCluster from Loft Labs, virtual clusters here, to give them the effect of isolation without the overhead of host clusters. So to me, the key takeaway here is that organizations have recognized that they need isolation for security purposes. One way to do that is separate clusters. Another way to do that is through virtual clusters. But either way, it's as this CTO says, it's pure security for us. Now, we talked earlier about cost, and this chart shows all of the ways that organizations think that they can improve efficiency of their Kubernetes environments. This was a pick as many as apply kind of question. These ones here were new this year, so you can't see the purple bar for 2023. But my takeaways from this are that organizations are trying everything they can to reduce costs. As per last year, automation is the key. That is a huge time saving in human cost. So when you're not having to go sign into every single cluster individually to apply a patch, but you can do 100 clusters at once, massive time savings. It also gives you the opportunity to fire up and spin down clusters as needed because you know it's not going to take you 20 hours to rebuild. Big interest in the technology levers that automatically size to improve utilization. Things like autoscaling, things like FinOps tools, AI operations tools. These are all seeing a lot of interest. And returning to the sort of size question from earlier on, we're seeing interest, as last year, in simplifying what goes into the cluster because that complexity is creating issues, it's creating cost. These columns here on the right, you can see these have all increased year on year. And these are what I think of as business levers to pull. Changing which vendor I use in order to reduce my bills. Switching where I'm hosting to avoid cloud bills. Changing processes. Wanting to save on license costs by switching virtualized to bare metal. Firing people. There's lots of analysis about that in the report itself. These have all seen a growth, and I think this is going back to some of that stuff we were seeing earlier about the ecosystem and the practices that vendors are pulling around increasing renewals, providing lock-in, increasing cloud bills. All of those come from the vendors being, in some cases, predatory, and organizations are reacting to that and looking for an alternative. The AI ops tools that we just saw on the previous slide, AI cost optimization, there's certainly desire to use those. I think you and I will have all seen lots of webinars and news articles about AI for the last year, to the point that we're kind of sick of it. But there's certainly ambition here to use AI to right-size clusters. That, to me, goes back to the fear of complexity in Kubernetes. If I can't size my clusters accurately, if I don't know what's going on in my infrastructure, maybe the AI can do it. But this is, as you can see when you read this, it's the end goal. It's the future state. None of the interviewees we spoke to believe that AI is even remotely there today for doing this kind of work. So let's finish. This is the future facing section, the new growth engines, as I call it. What are the areas that we see Kubernetes going into over the next 10 years? We've spoken a couple of times already about AI, and we asked, are you using AI for these things related to Kubernetes or planning to? And you can see somewhere around 4 in 10 say they're doing all of these things. The two on the left are internal. Are we using AI assistants to manage Kubernetes? Are we using AI to optimize our Kubernetes costs? The two on the right are about running AI workloads on Kubernetes. And again, significant adoption and significant planned adoption. So we don't know whether this will translate into an actual forecast, but the intent, the optimism is there for the majority of organizations to say they will be doing all of these AI-related things within the next 12 months. That's a big shift. If we'd asked this 12 months ago, the number would have been much closer to 0. The link here comes from this healthcare CTO. AI requires elastic frameworks, elastic compute power, and Kubernetes is just the natural platform for that due to its scalability, but also due to the fact that it runs everywhere. And we saw both cloud, data center, and AI coming up, and edge coming up as destinations for AI workloads. Speaking of edge, this is a subject very dear to our hearts. We are an edge Kubernetes management platform in part. And we've asked in previous years about edge adoption. Last year we asked this question about how far along are you with your edge adoption? And you can see the chart has changed shape quite significantly. Last year, a big percentage of organizations were working on their plans or engaged in a pilot. And now the number of organizations that say they are in full-scale deployment has shot up to 27%, so 4 times year-on-year growth. Organizations have got off the fence effectively. You've also seen that the not considering it percentage has doubled year on year. This growth is great, but it's being strongly driven by enterprises. The majority of enterprises say they are doing edge. Hardly any are small businesses. This is not because those organizations don't have edge locations, which might be customer sites, for example. We believe this is due to the challenges and maturity of managing organizations at the edge, which is a very enterprise scale kind of problem. So we asked again about edge challenges. This is an echo of that previous chart about Kubernetes challenges. You can see that the lines are very steady, even trending upwards for almost all of the challenges. This means that despite 2 years of progress, things are still very hard for organizations. Compliance and security has dropped a little, which is a very good thing, still number 1. But these next two have grown significantly. Day 2 operations and field engineering visits. They are very strongly correlated to each other. And these are the things that you encounter when you start doing edge at scale. How do I patch these devices? How much is it going to cost me to have an engineer go and visit 200 sites out in rural locations? This is where the cost consideration of Kubernetes comes in again as well, and how do you bring that down? Indeed, the people we spoke to came up with the exact same message. Nobody on site has any idea about the technology. We also find that organizations are often deploying in disconnected locations, and how do you manage those? Disconnected or intermittent. And the last topic. If you're anything like me, you've seen a lot of discussion of Broadcom and VMware in your LinkedIn feed, lots of articles, lots of webinars, lots of very scared organizations who are getting huge renewal fees coming through. We asked some inhibition questions again. So 73% said their adoption of Kubernetes has been inhibited by their organization's continued use of traditional VMs. It ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, that story has changed now. 59% say that Broadcom's takeover of VMware has accelerated the adoption of cloud-native technologies like Kubernetes. And when we asked, well, why are you looking to move more workloads to Kubernetes, more than half of senior Senior leaders said that decision was motivated by a strategic effort to reduce their dependence on VMware. We also saw some actual behavioral indicators come through, which you may have noticed in previous slides. The number of organizations that said they were looking at moving to bare metal off of virtualized platforms is up. The number who said they were investigating shifting to less costly software vendors is also up. These kinds of things are, in my view, showing how people are looking at moving away from the traditional virtualized data center. This CTO kind of sums it up. This is a multi-year journey. We're not going to move completely away from virtualization immediately. We may look at alternative hypervisors, but next 3 to 4 years, we're containerizing, we're moving to Kubernetes. It's a journey. So that's the whistle-stop tour of the 5 key findings from the report. What are your next steps? You can check out this landing page where we have the report ready to download. There are 20 plus charts, there are 40 pages of analysis, data points and quotes, lots more rich detail on top of what I've discussed today. Do share the report if you can with your colleagues on your social feeds. This is great data, it's independent, it's current, and we believe it's going to really help organizations catalyze their decision making for the next 10 years of Kubernetes. We do plan to conduct this report again next year, so if you do have any ideas for things that you want us to cover or any questions about the research, drop us an email at this address and it will get us to a real human. So thank you very much for your time today. We hope you enjoy the report and see you again next time.